Victorian Premier John Brumby has promised that no dust will be allowed to gather on the Royal Commission report into the Black Saturday bushfires. The state government today released its interim response, giving in-principle support to 59 of 67 recommendations. But there's to be at least another couple of weeks of community consultation. What's won support so far includes the appointment of a fire commissioner to establish a clear chain of command and responsibility after the Royal Commission's harsh criticism of the top people on the day of the emergency. But more contentious and expensive measures, such as a government buyback of properties in high-risk zones, the restriction of building in those areas and burying power lines, are still to be considered. Lisa Whitehead reports.
We kept uppermost in our minds the sanctity of human life.
It is good to be with you on a very important day for both Victoria and for Australia.
After 155 days of hearings and evidence from 100 witnesses affected by the bushfires, the final report of the Bushfires Royal Commission has laid bare a litany of bungles and incompetence.
Oh my God, this is Armageddon.
What went wrong?
I think that's a question that will trouble everybody that's involved in this incident.
No one helped me. We don't want this tragedy to ever happen again.
173 people died when ferocious fires swept through Victoria that day. The Victorian government acted swiftly to appoint a royal commission to investigate the nation's worst natural disaster.
The regulars at the Royal Commission would know that there are times that there was rarely a dry eye in the room.
Under pressure to respond, the Brumby government has said it will support 59 of the 67 recommendations in principle.
And they've given us, in the last 2 days, also a very comprehensive blueprint for the state. Notwithstanding, it is appropriate, I think, that we do consult with the community, as I've said, about some of the measures that they've recommended.
Now, the communities are overwhelmingly saying the time for talk has finished, it's now time to act.
I don't have a lot of confidence in John Brumby's interpretation of swiftness.
And what has it been up until now?
As the report was scrutinised by authorities and the media in Melbourne, in Marysville, where 34 lives were lost on that horrific day, many residents just wanted to avoid reopening old wounds.
You're not ready to read it?
No. I read the page that had the names of all the victims on it, and that was about enough for me.
The 7:30 report first met Marysville resident Steve Guilfoyle and his young son Jake the day after the fires.
I was going to have one after.
Yeah, I'm all right, mate.
Shaven.
No, I'm just cold. Just nerves.
Steve Guilfoyle, his wife Corinne and their 2 children survived, but 9 people in their street died that night.
That fire that came through here, it was a firestorm. It was bigger than Ben-Hur. It was just overwhelming to CFA, SES and everybody that was involved in it. It was too big.
He says lessons must be learned from that day, and that's why he intends to read the Bushfires Royal Commission report when he's ready. But he won't like what he finds. The Commissioner's scrutiny of the management of the Murrindindi fire that engulfed Marysville was scathing. While the Commissioners stopped short of criticising individuals, they did expose systematic failings, pointing to a lack of coordination between the agencies and saying the Incident Control Centre was underprepared and there was a lack of planning for the day. They said had the Control Centre received information and analysed it more promptly, there was no doubt Marysville and neighbouring towns would be directly in the path of the fire after the expected wind change. On the morning of Black Saturday, the town's only doctor, Lachlan Fraser, was out running when he spotted the first signs of smoke from a mountain lookout. He spent 2 futile hours searching for information, but as his house came under Ember attack, he fled to the town's oval.
There were some dire warnings from anti-villains up the fire tower, but they weren't passed on along the chain of command, and the result is that the emergency services didn't really come in to the last minute around here.
The Commission has recommended more detailed and timely warnings to people as part of a range of options to supplement the controversial stay and defend or leave early policy.
173 people are dead who presumably intended to look after themselves. This policy has plainly failed.
Surprisingly to some, the Commission refused to totally abandon the stay or go policy, but says it needs to be overhauled.
It's really a matter of having different circumstances dictate what is the right kind of approach, and it will be clearly go if there's any real danger, but in other circumstances I would hope that there are other options available.
The Commission says refuges, bushfire shelters and evacuations must be put back on the agenda. The outgoing federal member for McEwen, Marysville's electorate, says it's about time.
In fact, the Commission criticised the state government for their tardiness and almost not wanting to get on to this issue of safe refuges. And as you know, I have said for a long time, if Black Saturday had happened on Black Friday, imagine what the toll would have been from our schools. We had 3 schools burnt. I mean, it's just too horrific to think about. We've simply got to acknowledge that there is a problem and address it.
There are a couple of changes.
Bushfire specialist Professor John Handmer says the biggest problem is predicting human behaviour. He investigated the circumstances of the deaths of the Black Saturday victims for the Commission and surveyed hundreds of people in high bushfire risk areas.
The most confronting result for us was that something like 60% of people or thereabouts said that on a code red declaration they would leave the high-risk area the night before or on the day of the declaration. Then there was a code red declaration in one of these areas, and there was a follow-up survey, and about 1.5% of people changed their behaviour because of that. This highlights this dramatic gap between knowledge and intent and action.
In line with fire authorities' policies on Black Saturday, no official evacuations were ordered or recommended that day. In Marysville, local police took it upon themselves to lead a convoy of cars from the Oval as the fire raced towards them.
They made a decision on their own again when they had no directive. They saved lives.
We've got livestock that are dying.
The Commissioners want the fire agencies to have the power to recommend evacuations, but people will still have the right to refuse to go.
If people come and knock on the door as well, that's a bonus, and it should happen if it's possible. But I'm afraid you can't rely on it.
Evacuation or just some sort of warning would have been good, like just some sort of warning.
On Black Saturday here in Marysville, no siren sounded to warn residents of the impending disaster. The Commissioners said sirens should be a part of any early warning system and expressed concern about the lack of action on sirens, saying there were too many barriers to communities installing them and not one Victorian town had applied to use one. The Commission also slammed the heads of fire agencies and the police for a failure of leadership on the day.
One of the frustrations of the Royal Commission, I think, was the fact that it was difficult to find who was responsible, who had the authority to make decisions and move. So at the moment, I guess there's a bit of turf war, in a sense, goes on between those agencies. What the Commission is saying, let's get an umpire, someone who needs to take responsibility for the functioning here, and that's going to be the Fire Commissioner.
The Commission did plant a few landmines for the state government, recommending a voluntary buyback scheme for people in places it says are just too dangerous to live.
They would be sites that are on ridge lines, often surrounded by gullies and in close proximity to forests, particularly if they're within 100 metres of a bush. We know that they are highly at-risk communities.
If you give somebody the opportunity of saying, OK, well, I can sell this back to the government and I can go and start somewhere else in a safer area or whatever, I think it's a good thing.
But I think this really raises a number of questions. Why is a particular property in this very vulnerable area? Is it because there has been a lack of fuel reduction over many, many years? Is it because of what the construction of the property? I think that this is a very difficult issue.
If the state government does adopt all the Commission's recommendations, in particular the upgrade of ageing power lines in high-risk areas, it will cost untold billions of dollars.
I think everyone acknowledged that there is a cost involved, but what price do you put on 173 lives?
70 years on, we haven't still implemented some of the recommendations from 1939 Royal Commission. We need to make sure that we actually take notice of all the effort, all the heartache, all the emotion that's gone into this Royal Commission. It shouldn't be a wasted opportunity.
In Marysville, Steve Guilfoyle and his family are just still trying to cope with the grief and the heartache. Neighbours who lost houses and loved ones are selling up around them, but the Guilfoyles are staying put and are now watching their new house take shape.
It is a good thing. It's progress. It's just progress. It's moving on with your life, and one day at a time. Everything's one day at a time up here.
Lisa Whitehead with that report.